Welcome to the BeWell Network program. My name is Dr. Ted Bender. I'm a clinical psychologist and CEO of the BeWell Network. You can always learn more about me at BeWellNetwork.com. Our number is 888-743-3751. A friendly reminder, we recently changed the name from the Sheer Recovery Podcast to the BeWell Network. All our previous episodes are still in our channel. My goal in this program is to educate people and to help many people understand that they are not alone. There is help for the many life obstacles that we endure. Today we have a special guest, Abe Cruz. He is a successful entrepreneur, athlete, and motivational speaker. He is also the founder and president of Forever Faith, a brand through which he carries a message of inspiration and joy through fitness gear, clothing, special events, which have reached millions of people all over the world. Thank you so much for being on our show today, Abe. I picked up a copy of your book a couple weeks ago, and the plan was to read it over about a 2-week period. And I started reading it at home, and my wife left in the morning, and she came home about 8 hours later, and I was still reading, and I finished it in one sitting. I literally couldn't put it down. I was really drawn to your story. It was inspirational. It was terrifying at times, but overall, I left feeling like I had another powerful message that I could help to deliver to people who were struggling, through your work and through your journey. So thank you so much for being here today.
Amen, amen, and amen. Thank you so much, Dr. Bender, for giving me the opportunity to be on here. I'm very grateful. I'm appreciative of it. So thank you so much. And I'm so glad that you liked the book and, was able to do that. And that's the purpose, is for you to take a message and pass it on to the next person.
And that's exactly what I got from it. And working in the substance use disorder and mental health field, we need as many of those positive messages as possible. And also, it's always really helpful to show, real life examples of how people overcame the greatest obstacles and turned their lives around, literally, 180 degrees. So for those people and our listeners out there, what have been some of your biggest challenges that you have had to overcome? Really, kind of what brought you to where you are today?
Well, that's where the story comes in, and it's a long story, but I was born and raised in East LA to a single mother. My father left when I was 4 years old. And now that I've done so many interviews, I still tell my father that I love him, even though I don't know him. He left when I was 4. We've had no communication, but for whatever reason and whatever obstacle and challenge he was going through in his life at that time, he felt like he had to go. So my mom was left to raise 3 children in a 1-bedroom apartment, pretty much all my life until I went to college. So growing up in poverty, I saw the world was so much, but I had so little. So I was eager and motivated to go after so much. And, what you're doing, first of all, is incredible, because the reality, the most of the problems that occur, most of the people that are in prison, most of the people that hit a rock bottom, they're dealing with some kind of a mental I guess the proper word is disorder, but I would call it a psychological battle. They're so easily influenced, as I was as a child.
No, absolutely. And, the part of your story where it really began and where I really saw the beginning of that struggle was your upbringing, having to, being raised by a single mom who sounded like she worked day and night to provide for your brother and your sister. And you had a particular drive from a very young age that really, I think, continued on and evolved over time for you. But it started with sports. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, absolutely. And, I thank my mom for telling me to get out of the house and go play, go run around the streets. And that turned into playing kickball and into baseball and basketball and then football. So I started playing sports at 11 years old, and, my mom enrolled me to the Boys and Girls Club. But even then at 11, I had such horrible acne. My face was full of acne that I was so embarrassed to go to school. So literally what I did was skip school and go practice every day. I would be at the park shooting hoops or running sprints. And that's not the thing to do. As I now talk to the youth, I speak with them. We can't be embarrassed. We can't allow the bullying and those psychological issues to slow us down. And that's what happens when we're so young.
Yet you were able to maintain your discipline with sports and training,
yes,
and eventually get past that obstacle of feeling embarrassed and being bullied. You've had some really great mentors along the way as well. Would you like to talk about any of those?
Oh man, absolutely. I mean, well, before it would have to start with my mother. It was
Yeah.
the first incredible mentor who pushed me and told me to go get out there. And as she was working 3 jobs and bringing us food every Friday night, I remember saying, "Thank you, Mom, so much for all the sacrifice and the hard work." And she taught me discipline. She taught me hard work and sacrifice. And then, I was fortunate to meet a basketball coach by the name of Oscar Cepeda out of Alhambra, California. And he took me from the hood, literally the hood,
Yeah.
and put me into, organized sports, and put me into a Catholic private school where, we ended up winning 80 games the first year. We went 80-0 in football, and,
Yeah.
and the same thing in basketball. And it's like God just continued to teach me along the way, and I met some incredible people.
And your talents on the field and on the court is then what took you to college.
Yes, it got me, it took me from junior high school to high school. I won a CIF championship my freshman year in high school as a true freshman, which, usually you don't win those kinds of things. So I was so fortunate there. And then I was able to go on to college and play at the University of Wisconsin Stout, where I started again as a true freshman and had a lot of success. But this is where the story, I understand now, starts to take its toll.
Yep.
My dreams and goals were to make it to the NFL or the NBA. But it got to a point where I started making a little bit of money in college, and it's like my focus shifted. And I was chasing money and then being a student athlete at the same time.
Your tenacity and drive in the sports world translated to the business world. Would you say that that's accurate?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You learn it from the greatest. I go back to Michael Jordan and Deion Sanders, who were, what everybody can, talks about, Brady or LeBron now, or Kobe. But, Jordan and Deion were the work ethic and the drive that we looked up to. And I was able to take that and apply it to the business world, even in college, as I got involved in my first network marketing company.
Right. And you were very successful there as well.
Yeah, I remember I was cutting hair my freshman year, $12 a haircut in college, and I was doing whatever I had to do. And then all of a sudden I go home to LA. I see all these 20-year-olds driving around Ferraris and Lamborghinis in a network marketing company, and I was hooked. I said, how do I do that, and where do I sign up? And that's what happened, and that's what led me to dropping out of college.
You were incredible talent on the field and on the court, as we mentioned, and you had aspirations of playing pro ball. You had several pretty devastating injuries along the way, and there was a point where you realized that the professional athlete track may not be in your future. I looked at that when I was reading your book as another one of those major obstacles that you had to overcome, not only figuring out what you were going to do in the physical world, but mentally. And how did you do that? And what would you offer? What kind of advice would you offer our listeners who are struggling with similar battles?
The reality is that everything in life happens for whatever reason it is at the time. And sometimes we don't know. The choices that we make today will impact us tomorrow and years from now. So at that time, I lost my faith is kind of what I would explain it is, that I said, man, I'm not going to make it to the NFL. I might have to go overseas and play. They're barely making $40,000 and $50,000. I'm small as it is. I'm getting injured. I need a different path. And network marketing came to the table. I ended up making like $30,000 in my first few weeks of the business. And like, that was it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm transitioning. I left college immediately.
Yeah.
Within 3-4 days, I dropped out, left football, and said, this is where I'm headed.
Yeah, and then you mentioned also that you were trying to really kind of maintain this lifestyle, or the image of this lifestyle. And again, working in the addiction field, I started to think about the parallels between the trying to maintain that and addiction itself. Another thing that really interested me about your story, and this is something I think is truly remarkable, you were in this world where you had to maintain an image. I remember you were doing club promoting. You were in the Hollywood scene, and you were around drugs and alcohol a lot, I would imagine. That would be very difficult for anyone to stay away from. But how did you maintain your drive, working hard to become successful, but stay away from all that temptation? I was very interested to learn more about that.
Yeah, when I got back to Los Angeles and kind of regrouped, and I was personal trainer in the morning, real estate during the day, club promotion at night. My focus was money. So drugs and alcohol, I saw as a distraction. You see a bunch of drunk people falling and getting in fights. And I just knew that that absolutely is not the way to go. I didn't need to be around that. So I had an addiction, what I would, what you would classify to money. I had an addiction to money, and living up to that status is really what it was about. Trying to make people think that I'm cool and living up to their expectations, what had nothing to do with my real life.
Right. Yeah, I would imagine it felt pretty compulsory or addicting, as you mentioned, to maintain that lifestyle. So while you may not have struggled with drugs and alcohol, luckily, right, because that would have definitely added to the fuel to the fire in that part of your life, it still felt like you had this compulsory drive to maintain that at any cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I speak now, I was just in Colombia last month. I was there for almost a month, 30 days. And I was speaking to the youth, and these youngsters at 8, 9, and 10 years old are playing soccer on the concrete floor with no shoes or socks. Yeah. Like, that's how much in poverty they're in. And, we don't know what we don't know until we witness it and we see it. And that's what I had to go through. So when I speak to the youth, I tell them to stay focused, not allow themselves to get corrupted and influenced. And who cares about trying to be cool? Because what the world paints as cool in reality isn't. I mean, the fancy cars and the houses and the yachts, that's all cool from a materialistic standpoint, but that doesn't help us in our life.
Yeah.
It doesn't help us one bit.
So Abe, I was interested in hearing a little bit more about how you ended up landing in prison. Our listeners sometimes struggle with mental health disorders and depression and anxiety. I know you dealt with a little bit of that while you were in prison, but again, it was one of those moments that you were able to really overcome and help turn your life around. I was wondering if you could discuss that a little bit.
Absolutely, but it's all of those different attributes that you mentioned. Depression and embarrassment and all the psychological battle is what led me to getting to the point where I went to prison. I got depressed and scared and got to a point where I was devastated, where I made a drastic choice to transport cocaine out of everything to do to make a quick buck to get me out of the hole financially. And that, came to a quick end. And I say it's fast cash, fast cash. Fast cash, fast crash. Is what I say, because, I ended up in prison at 24 years old, 25 years old, and they wanted to send me away for 30 years. Yeah. So it was a very devastating time.
And how were you able to get over the devastating reality that you were going to prison for such a long time in order to kind of get back to a winning mindset?
In reality, my mom is my guardian angel. My mom, after she yelled at me and told me how much of an idiot I was, she told me, get on your hands and knees and ask God for a second chance. This is the only way you're going to change your life around. It is time to understand you're either going to die in prison, okay, or you're going to be out on the streets and someone's going to kill you. So it is time to make a decision. And she said, put God first and yourself second. So in prison, she said, you need to make a sacrifice. I fasted for 40 days while I was in prison. I went from 185 to 150 pounds, wow. But I had this spiritual connection where I was in a direct communication with God. And that's where it all began. And all of the depression and anxiety and chaos, it all left immediately after that prayer and that sacrifice.
Did you ever have times in prison where you thought about self-harm?
In my first 6 to 7 months, yeah. Absolutely. In my first 6 to 7 months before that fasting and before that prayer, I saw people getting murdered. I saw a 21-year-old stab another person in the neck with a pencil because they owed him 50 cents in top ramen noodles. So I was scared. I was worried. I was petrified. But after I locked down and said that prayer that my mom told me to do, my entire life changed right there in prison, and I was focused on a successful future.
As time went by, people started kind of to rally around you or seek support. And I really thought that was a very interesting part of your journey as well. You ended up kind of being a support or a beacon for others.
Well, I absolutely knew where I was headed. And, the sad part is that I witnessed so many of these inmates on the phone with their family or writing letters to them, and they lost all their faith. They didn't know what they were going to do when they got out of prison. So they literally lost all their faith. And this is where I prayed for them. We worked out together. Yeah. We ate food together. We did Bible studies. We did fitness training. We read leadership training. And I was about motivating and inspiring them to become better and that they had a future.
So it was very helpful to you to give back to others while you were in that situation as well.
When I said that prayer and had that direct communication with God, he told me the mission is to help people. The mission is forever faith, mindset of champions.
Mm-hmm.
And the mindset of a champion, there are no obstacles, there are no problems. As soon as you see one of those things, you come to a solution instantly. We don't waste time on problems, we only figure out solutions.
And while you were in there, and as this evolution in your mind took place, this is where Forever Faith was born, essentially.
Absolutely. I started designing clothes. I started designing products with the message.
Yeah.
And it's that message. I just put Forever Faith on a shirt, and I was a horrible artist. So I started to pay some of the tattoo artists in prison with commissary, with top ramen noodles or coffee. One of the artists liked to stay up all night. I gave him coffee. I said, hey, work all night. Let's create some artwork for the future. And the brand, I did a poor man's trademark. Mm-hmm. That's where you design everything, you put it in an envelope, you seal it, you don't open it, and you send it off to yourself. That's what I did because I knew what the future was in store.
Very interesting. And how has that brand developed over time?
Well, I just got back from Colombia. The brand, three years out of prison, I was offered a $3 million buyout. And it was only a bunch of T-shirts and a couple little designs. We had a lot of success and interest in the brand. Evander Holyfield called us. Paula Abdul called us. We did a lot of photo shoots, and that is now transitioned into jewelry, a nutritional supplement line. We have the book right here behind me, and the book has won 2 awards. We're now in 600 stores in Puerto Rico, in Walmart, Walgreens, the Bookmark, the airport, and we're moving into Mexico and Colombia.
That's fantastic. Congratulations on all your successes.
Thank you.
What kind of advice would you give to someone out there who may be listening to this podcast right now, or has seen your brand or has read your book, who really needs to kind of make a massive life change? So what would you suggest that they begin doing, and how would you suggest that they get there?
Well, I would suggest that for when they slow down and retake control of their life. One of the reasons that we go into these mental states is because we're not in control of our life. Our mind is in control of us. So we need to take control and slow down. I always start with a prayer. I ask God to give us direction and reflect where we're headed. And after that, you got to get up every morning and grind. You got to work hard. You got to put in the time and the effort.
These days, social media is a huge part of everybody's lives. And there is, unfortunately, a lot of evidence showing that it's not very good for kids and teens.
Right.
And with regards to your story and looking at social media, which is always showing the image of the fast life that you mentioned being very involved with, the money, the fame, and so on. What advice would you give to our youth today in 2021?
To be a leader. The majority of people are followers, and they're following the trends, and they're following this person in their new car that they probably just rented, and their fake Rolex, and everyone's putting on a front. And I don't post those kinds of things anymore. I show behind the scenes of hard work and grind and factories and printing and what the business is about, but I'm not flaunting stuff. So I tell the youth, be a leader. The mindset of champions is a leader. Don't allow everybody else to scrutinize you and try to manipulate your mindset.
What are you working on now, Abe? What's next for Forever Faith?
Well, being in Colombia has opened up the global market, now Mexico. So we're working on manufacturing in Colombia, our apparel, because we're going into bigger box retail stores. Great. We want to get into some of the Ross and the TJ Maxx and the Marshalls, and specifically those because that's where my mother could afford. A single mother can't afford an $80 hoodie. Yeah. She can afford a $15 to $20 shirt. We want to help the youth. But besides that, we're turning the book into a movie.
Oh, so, excellent. When is that coming out?
Well, we're at the phases right now where we're gathering the right director. And I've talked to Jesse Terrero, who directed the Nicky Jam story, which is an incredible story. It's a big project. It's a multi-million-dollar project. So we need to have the right people on board. So we're putting all that puzzle together now.
Well, that will be exciting because if you haven't had a chance to read the book, which I highly recommend, a movie would be equally as fascinating. I would love to see it. Abe, I do a lot of podcasts and TV, and I try to get the message out as much as I possibly can, and I know you do. And I was recently asked why I do so much television and radio and print work as a CEO of a mental health treatment company. And the answer for me was very simple. If I do this for 30 years and one person changes their life or survives or doesn't die from this disease, then it'll all have been worth it. And I have been blessed many times to have people tell me that they saw my podcast or they saw me on the news or they saw me on TV, and that is what motivated them to get help and to change their life around. And I know that you travel the world speaking to our youth, and you know as well as I do that youth suicide is on the rise. And overdose death is much more frequent these days. When you and I were kids, experimenting meant drinking a couple beers or smoking some marijuana. These days, kids are getting fentanyl-laced pills pressed on the street, and they're just taking one, and it's the first and last time they ever experiment. So has anyone ever reached out to you saying, hey, you've changed the direction of my life? And what are some of the powerful messages you've received from your work?
Yes, absolutely. And the same reason that you're doing this, we just want to save a life. And if we could just be one person, when I've gone into a juvenile detention center, I might speak in front of 50 people and I tell them, if I can get just one of you guys and help you for your future, that's the mission is complete. God's happy. We're here to help each other. So, I get more single mothers with their kids in prison or juvenile detention centers that are reaching out to me, asking for help and direction and a prayer, so I try to do the best that I can on that level.
Yeah, that's interesting you mentioned that, because a lot of times people that reach out to us for help are they are the mothers of children desperately seeking help for their help. Abe, tell our listeners a little bit about what your inspiration was for writing the book and when you decided to do that.
Absolutely. The inspiration for putting the book together was at rock bottom in prison. I just knew, and I was focused on turning that negative into a positive, and it was written down in prison. I put together a to-do list, start a clothing line, a supplement line, a jewelry line, make a book. At the time, I actually wrote the Book of Abraham is what I wrote on paper, but we ended up changing the name. So I knew that there was going to be a story told to inspire and motivate people. As I mentioned, everyone in prison lost their faith. They didn't want to get out. They would rather stay in prison because they had a bed, 3 meals a day, and a shower. And it wasn't even hot. It was freezing cold most of the time. But they felt that was more secure than getting out to the real world and getting a job and providing for their family.
What kind of mental process has to take place from your experience to get to the point where you'd rather stay inside than have your freedom?
You can only imagine how lost and confused and depressed, and how their mind is, like they say, playing tricks on them. It's going back and forth, good cop, bad cop, the devil. It's just, there's so much chaos going on in your mind that you lose full control of life. And one of the things that I really emphasize when I speak is living life in a conscious state. Most people live life in a subconscious state where they have no idea what they're doing, but they're going through the motions. And life is one of those tasks, going through the motions.
Yeah, we spend a lot of our time really thinking about the present and the past, and very little time, or the future and the past, and very little time just being right here, being present, being in the moment. You're absolutely right about that.
And one of the things to add on to that is that when you're living in a subconscious state, you're so easily influenced and manipulated by whatever you're seeing. It could be a commercial that tells you, hey, let me go eat some fat French fries and a hamburger and a milkshake, because subconsciously it's pulling at you. But a conscious mind would say, that's not going to help me in any way.
When we're younger, we think we're invincible, and things that happen to other people won't happen to us. And I could kind of read between the lines in your book too that you really kind of had that mentality pretty strong. You got to a place where you were, I don't want to say comfortable, but more comfortable than most would be driving across the country with either cash or narcotics. You even got to the point where you felt extremely, maybe overconfident, talking to the police if you got pulled over.
Absolutely. And so confident, and I'll use the word arrogance and naive. And like you said, when we're young, we think we're invincible. And I had no problem lying to the cops. And I'm so am so embarrassed to even acknowledge that right now, but I'm also acknowledging that many people are in that state, and that's why there's so much chaos. That's why so many people end up in prison. That's why so many people commit suicide. That's why so many people have these mental health issues. Wouldn't you say that?
I mean, yeah, that's why I'm so grateful that you so openly share your story, because I know from working as a psychologist and working in treatment is that we can't scare anybody straight. It just doesn't work, unfortunately. If it did, then, we just set up a haunted house and scare everybody all day long, right? But scaring people straight doesn't work. And especially, again, I go back to being young and invincible. It's, oh, that happened to you, it's not going to happen to me. It absolutely can. Your life can change in an instant. And that's why I would say, to our listeners and to our youth out there, I'm not here to scare you. Abe isn't here to scare you either. We're both here to share with you and to tell you that, the decisions that you make in life have real world consequences, and sometimes very devastating. And no matter what you've seen on television or prison TV shows, you don't know what it is or what it's like until you're in that environment.
And when you're in that environment, when you're in prison, when you're in a crack house, when you're in a horrible situation, you're going to soon realize that your friends, your family, and everybody who was hanging out with you during the good times are not going to be there in the bad times. When I was in prison, no one sent me money except my mom. No one wrote me except my mom. Mm-hmm. And my ex-girlfriend wrote me simply to tell me, stop writing me because I don't want to talk to you ever again. So there's so much chaos that comes with our decision making that lead to the disruption. So, absolutely, you hit it on the head, and everything that you're doing at BeWell is so important. I'd love for us to do something together out in LA or something. We can set up an event.
I would absolutely love to do that, and I'd really appreciate being a part of that in any way I could. So many things lead to these potential outcomes, whether it's what you went through or alcohol use or a drug use, getting behind the wheel of a car, getting to an accident, multiple DUIs. There's many ways that people can end up, kind of in prison or with other types of consequences. And, what you experienced in prison, you saw a lot of violence and traumatic events. And people that suffer from traumatic events in their lives are then again more likely to end up in those type of situations. At BeWell Network, it's very important for me to let our listeners know that there is help available. You don't have to suffer in silence. The symptoms you're experiencing of anxiety and depression and trauma or drug use or whatever that you're experiencing, you're not going through it alone. There are millions of people suffering from these types of disorders. But these disorders and these symptoms cluster into syndromes, which are known as mental health disorders or mental illness. And the good news is that many of them are highly treatable. I would urge you all very, very much to reach out for help. Reach out to BeWell. Reach out to anybody. There's no reason you need to continue to suffer in silence. We are there to help you.
Dr. Bender, I have a question for you. And I'm asking you for the fact that I'm not sure that I know the answer, and I question myself sometimes, right? But ending up in prison or a DUI or suicide, I hate to bring that up, but suicide, all of these different obstacles, challenges, and mental illnesses, if you had to pick one reason on why people have gotten to that point, what would it be?
That is a fantastic question, and thank you for asking that, Abe. And as you mentioned, there is definitely no one path to these kind of outcomes. There's certainly genetic issues, heritability, environment. But if I had to choose one thing, especially one thing that I see again and again in my career working in mental health and substance use disorders, it's childhood trauma. Childhood trauma, especially depending on if it's severe and more than once, wreaks havoc on someone's life. And that can lead to all kinds of negative outcomes, as you can imagine, whether that's drug use or mental health disorders, a lot of times both, which then lead to a whole range of bad decisions, poor environmental choices, hanging around with the wrong people. And then like you saw in prison, I would be willing to bet the vast majority of inmates there had some sort of diagnosable mental health disorder or substance use disorder.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And your response on that, is definitely along the lines of what I was thinking. You just gave me a more complete, sophisticated, educated response, which is great. what I was going to throw out there is, and you said it, that childhood trauma.
Yeah.
And I think that also has to relate with peer pressure,
Yes.
because that's almost automatic from that childhood standpoint. I use myself as an example. My mom used to buy us the $16 Payless shoes from Payless. And I think I wrote a little bit about that in the book. I had to wear 8 socks to cover up because I had holes on the bottom of my shoes. And yet my other friends that I saw at school were wearing Jordans and Reeboks and all those shoes. And I was made fun of. There was times where I'd wear the same shirt 2 or 3 times in a week. And I was made fun of. So that all relates to peer pressure and child trauma.
Exactly.
That leads me to making these horrible choices.
Exactly. And you also mentioned growing up without a father and not knowing why he wasn't there and, what that did to your self-esteem. I'm sure that you had all kinds of questions about that. Why didn't he stay? Why did he leave? And you probably blamed yourself, even though there was absolutely nothing to blame yourself about. You mentioned the bullying.
Well, I'm not sure I blame myself on that. It could be since I was so young, but I definitely take responsibility on my mom not being able to remarry after because me and my brother were a problem.
I read that. Yeah, I got that from the book for sure. Yeah. But we talked a little bit earlier about social media too, and we don't know exactly why social media is having such a negative impact on our youth and teens. But the bullying piece that you mentioned certainly seems to be a clear indicator. And then it goes back to what we were just talking about, childhood trauma and traumatic events. I can't imagine personally what it's like, what the online life is like for middle school and high school students right now. When I grew up, we didn't have any of that. We didn't have any of those problems.
Right.
We just played sports and we were outside all day.
Right.
Nowadays, it's a whole other world. I have 2 little kids. You have kids as well that are going through that. And I can't imagine what that pressure is even like on our kids.
It's saddening at the worst. My 9-year-old son, said for Christmas, Dad, can you just give me money for virtual? I want to buy everything virtually. I want to buy these virtual games and these avatars and everything is into the crypto. Everything that's good could be used for bad and evil too, right? And as much as it's good online, and look at this technology, we're able to capitalize from different states or across the world. There's still the negative aspect that's brainwashing and frying our kids' intellect, which is very sad. And I see it,
I do too. I have a 9-year-old boy as well, and he's pretty much the same. He's into his iPad and he's into the online world, and that's really all he cares about. He plays a lot of sports, luckily, but that is definitely the kind of consuming drive. We're in a different age. Our parents probably said the same thing when we were kids, and now we're adults and we have kids and we're saying the same thing, and we don't know where it's going to go. But it kind of comes back to your very good question, which is, again, I think one of the biggest causes of a lot of issues that people develop over their lifetime is childhood trauma and traumatic events.
That makes perfect sense. And I think I've learned a lot just speaking from you, and I'm so glad that we're able to do this, because it makes me become even more conscious in me delivering the message I'm delivering, being able to take some of the information that you've given me to implement it when I speak to the youth. It's so important.
Yeah, and I've learned a lot from you as well, not only just talking to you today, but through your words on paper. And, the biggest message that I really took away is no matter the obstacle, no matter how hopeless it seems, there's always a path forward. And for you, it was your faith in God and your supportive family that got you through. And for our listeners who are out there now who are struggling, just know that there's help available. And for you, there is also a pathway forward.
Absolutely. I always end a phrase with, put God first, yourself second. When you put God first and yourself second, that is the mindset of champions. And with that formula, you cannot lose. And there's some people that don't believe in God. And you know what I say to that? I say, it's okay. That's fine. Then believe in yourself at least.
Yeah.
If you don't believe in God, believe in yourself, and you will get through the tough times. And there's no doubt the success is right there in front of you.
Just a special thanks again to Abe Cruz for joining us today on the BeWell Network. I'm Dr. Ted Bender, Chief Executive Officer of BeWell. Until next time.